Hello everyone. In this short video, I'm going to explain what is a theory and what is a model. Let's start with a path-of diagram. Start from the basic model, right? One independent and one dependent variable. Then we identify the relationship between these most important variables. It could be positive, it could be negative, or simply no relationship or nonlinear relationship. But let's focus on the basics as well, right? Because these are the foundations for building more complicated models based on more nuanced theories. And we also need to understand what is our unit of analysis. Is it individual or organization or even country? Or is this, if it's time variance, then is it a day, a week, or a year? And we also needed to come up a hypothesis to give some of the not too much, not too little details about the relationship, right? So what is a theory? The theory identifies key variables. So here we wanted to understand the predictor or independent variables and the outcome, the dependent variable, all right? Or you can say a cause and effect. So theory tell the causal stories. Often we want to keep it simple and straightforward. So we focus on one factor that causes one effect. So theory also explains variation, right? There are two different types of variation. One is a longitudinal variation if it's variation over time, or it's cross-sectional variation, the variation across different units at a point in time. And theory also generates testable hypotheses, right? So hypotheses are the predictions you made of like when X happens, what will happen to Y, right? What will happen if a theory is correct or incorrect? So you use empirical data to test it, right? So that's called hypothesis testing. And the theory also focuses on modifiable variables. Now, this is especially important in applied policy research because we always want some policy to address a social problem. Right? So you want to modify the problem into a positive way so that you can improve the well-being of the societal members. So what is the model? The model is a graphic or mathematical representation of variables, relationships, and unit of analysis. And of course, if you would like, you can state a hypothesis between the relationship. So basically, it means we wanted to identify, let's start with the very basic model, one independent, one dependent variable, and identify the relationship. It could be positive, negative, no relationship. All right, so you can use a equation, for instance, mathematical expression of a model, or you can say, okay, I'm going to use a graph, all right, like this. Now this path diagram or the model shows the relationship between social disorder and crime. So this is the expression, model expression of the broken window theory. Right, so broken window theory suggests that if you don't address small crimes like the broken windows, right, you are inviting more criminals. So the idea is broken window signals less police force, social disorder, and then the criminal says, okay, there's more opportunity to conduct crimes, right? So that's inviting more crime. So there's a positive relationship between the degree of social disorder and future crimes. So here, the independent variable is actually the social disorder, while the dependent variable is the crime. Now, you can measure social disorder in many different ways, and of course you can measure a crime in different ways, right? But the idea is you need to identify the variables so that you can have a better idea on how you're going to measure it later. So the causal mechanism, as I just explained, this is because of the broken windows theory. Broken windows, if you don't fix them, then invites more crimes. Okay, so that's a hypothesis. There's a reason behind this. Now let's see another example, which is very common. Say the relationship between earnings and education. Now, generally speaking, we would say if you receive higher education, you are going to be more competitive on the future job market. Thus, you are going to have a higher income. So here, if that holds, then the independent variable will be education, and the earnings will be your dependent variable. The presumed causal mechanism is, of course, if you receive higher education, you accumulate more human capital, you are more competitive on the job market, then you earn more, right? So this is one way to look at it. Now, someone might argue, okay, could the reverse also be true? Could earning determine whether or not you are going to get higher education? Now, that's probably true, especially true when we apply the earning on your parents' side, on the parents' side. All right, so if the parents have a higher level of earnings, and it's more likely than kids are going to go to college. The reason, the presumed causal mechanism is just because they can afford it. So the direction of a relationship, as we already showed, it could be positive or it could be negative. Positive, which means your independent and dependent variables move in the same direction, right? X increases, then Y increases. Or it could be negative, which means they move in the opposite direction. X increases while Y decreases. All right, Y here is a dependent variable, X here is an independent variable. Now let's look at the relationship between social disorder and crime. Now one would say if you have a higher level of social disorder, then you will have a higher level of crime. So which means they move in the same direction. This is a positive relationship. Now if we look at the relationship between income and crime, that tells a different story. When you have a higher income, generally speaking, you don't need to commit a crime, right? So, which means you are going to have a lower level of crime or less crime. So they move in the opposite direction. Higher income, lower crime rates. So this is a negative relationship between these two. Now we need to think about the unit of your analysis. Right? So the unit of analysis is defined as the objects or things described by the variables in a model. So you can have the same theory while with different unit of analysis. So for instance, if we are looking at the theory of crime, right? So your unit of analysis could be blocks, districts, or could be cities, which is quite common, and could also be countries, right? So they are different unit of analysis, while they still represent the same theory. Or if you transfer it into longitudinal, it could be yearly, right? If you look at the 60s, 1960s, the United States have a very high level of crime, while in the 90s, the crime rate suddenly in all the big cities all over the United States, it went down. Then we need to explain why, right? But in that case, the unit of analysis could be blocks, districts, cities, and countries. All right, so in longitudinal research, the unit of analysis, as we say, just mentioned the example, the 90s, the 60s, right? So it could be decades, right? Or yearly. So if we see the variation over time, then our unit of analysis will be time, different time periods. All right, so finally, let me give you some tips for creating a logic model. All right, let's start with a single outcome, your dependent variable, your y. And then you focus on a single independent variable, which is your x, representing a factor that you are interested in. And then you put x on the left and put y on the right, or vice versa. It depends on your preference. But anyway, you need to remember which one is your independent variable, which one is your dependent variable. And then you ending the intervening variables between x and y, right? So you distinguish causal chains from separate pathways, and then you look at links that need to be explained. So the idea is you also need to identify your unit of analysis, the relationship between x and y, and possibly you give some details, all right? But make sure there's not too much or too little detail for your audience. All right, so that will be all for this short video. Thank you very much.